The Galactic Court was a place where power itself was put on display. Warlords from across the stars gathered under glittering banners, each hungry for alliances, territory, or prestige. Tonight, the prize was unlike any other, a living legend bound in chains, her very presence enough to silence the hall. She was known as the Berserker Princess, the last daughter of a warrior empire burned into history. Her eyes glowed like embers beneath a crown of iron restraints, and even chained, she radiated the kind of danger that made the most ruthless generals shift uneasily in their seats. The auctioneer's voice rang out with ceremonial flourish, announcing the opening bid. Silence followed. Whispers slithered through the crowd. Everyone knew what it meant to claim her. This was no trophy, no obedient captive. Entire fleets had fallen to her wrath. She was rage incarnate, and no binding collar had ever truly held her. To purchase her was not to own a prize, but to invite death. The first warlord lowered his eyes. Another pretended to check a datapad, feigning disinterest. Some laughed nervously, but none dared move. The fear was too great. She had once reduced a battlefront to drifting wreckage in minutes, her screams echoing across comm channels like the war song of a god. Even now, shackled by alien technology that dampened her strength, the audience sensed she could break free if only she willed it hard enough. The air itself seemed to tense around her, daring anyone, to risk their life for her. Time stretched. The auctioneer repeated himself, voice cracking. Still no hand rose. Whispers turned to jeers. What good was a queen who would kill her new master before dawn? What fool would waste credits on a weapon that turned on its wielder? The silence became a humiliation, the galaxy declaring her untouchable. And then, from the back of the hall, a single hand rose. Small compared to the clawed fists and armored talons of alien aristocrats. Human. Ordinary. The room shifted, shock freezing the air. For a heartbeat, no one believed it. A human, one of the younger species barely recognized among the great powers, had dared to bid. Laughter erupted. Cruel, echoing, incredulous. To them, it was the ultimate joke. What was a human in this hall of giants? Their kind had no empires, no legacy of endless conquest. To claim the Berserker Princess was not just reckless, it was suicide wrapped in delusion. Whispers turned venomous. He'll be dead before the ink dries. The beast will rip him apart. Perhaps he wants a glorious end. The auctioneer stammered but confirmed the bid. None contested. None wished to be dragged into the fire that hand had summoned. In one motion, the human had gained what no warlord dared touch, not because of cunning wealth, not because of power, but because he was the only one willing to reach. The princess lifted her gaze. Until that moment, she had watched the hall with cold indifference, the mask of a prisoner who knew her fate held nothing but chains and mockery. But now her eyes sharpened, burning through the noise. She looked directly at the human who had raised his hand. Not at the warlords, not at the auctioneer, but at him. A silent question sparked between them.
Why?
The laughter dimmed, unsettled by the weight of her attention. Her lips curled in something between amusement and disbelief. For the first time that night, she did not look like a broken trophy or a bound beast. She looked alive, interested, dangerous in a way none of the lords could comprehend. The hall did not realize it yet, but the moment had already shifted. One act of audacity had pierced through centuries of fear. The Berserker Princess was claimed, and it was not by a warlord, not by a tyrant, but by a lone human who dared raise his hand where every other voice had fallen silent. The transaction was sealed with little ceremony. No one stepped forward to challenge the claim. No rival dared test the moment. To the alien court, it was a spectacle already won. They whispered among themselves, trading smirks and wagers. The human had purchased not a prize but his own demise. They believed it was only a matter of hours before the Berserker Princess tore him apart, just as she had done to so many others who tried to wield her. Her reputation was stronger than the chains, and no logic could convince them otherwise. She was delivered to him like a dangerous artifact. The chains that bound her glowed faintly, suppressing her fury, though even that technology pulsed under strain as if struggling to contain the force within her veins. When they stood alone, the guards lingered at the door, waiting for the inevitable scream. None came. Instead, silence stretched, sharp as a blade. She fixed him with eyes that promised death, waiting for his first mistake. He did not command her to kneel, nor did he bark orders as so many conquerors had done before. He did not even try to project dominance. Instead, he inclined his head slightly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. He spoke her name, her true name, not her title, and the word carried a weight that caught her off guard. No one had dared speak it in years. To the galaxy, she was the Berserker, the weapon, the terror. To him, she was still a person. "Do you think you own me?" she asked, her voice edged with venom. "No," he answered evenly. "But I think we both stand to gain more if we stop pretending this is ownership." The response startled her, though she masked it with a cold laugh. He had no armor, no blades, no implants bristling with weaponry. He was flesh and bone, fragile in comparison to the titans of the court. And yet he stood as if none of that mattered. She tested him, stepping closer, her presence oppressive, her chained strength humming in the air like a storm about to break. His pulse quickened, but he did not retreat. She snarled, probing for fear. Still, he held firm. Humans, she realized, were unlike the predators she knew. Others sought control through dominance, through fear, through iron will forged into cruelty. This one stood without those trappings. His defiance was quieter, born not of arrogance, but of certainty. He did not want her rage as a weapon. He wanted her choice. The absurdity of it struck her, and for the first time in years, she laughed, not with joy but with bitter amusement. A human dared to think respect was enough to stand between her fury and the galaxy. Every other species had tried to shackle her power, and all had failed. And yet this fragile being thought he could face her storm with nothing but patience. He did not flinch when she warned him of her rage. He did not waver when she told him she could end him in an instant. His answer was always the same. "Then, end me. But I don't think you want to." The words struck deeper than she expected. No lord had ever given her that choice. They all assumed her nature defined her, that she was nothing more than a weapon waiting to be turned. But this man, this human, believed she had a will stronger than the fury forced upon her. Days passed within the chamber, and the court grew impatient for news of his demise. They waited for reports of blood and shattered walls. Instead, word trickled out that the humans still lived. Each rumor sharpened into disbelief. The Berserker princess, chained or not, should have torn him limb from limb. Yet she had not. Their private exchanges became a battleground of words rather than blades. She tested him with threats, with silence, with flashes of temper, but he never met her with fear. His calm persistence began to unearth something long buried within her. Curiosity. Why risk everything when there was no guarantee of survival? Why refuse to yield to the certainty of her power? The answer lay in the strange resilience of his species. He told her of humanity, of worlds built not by the strongest, but by those too stubborn to bow, too reckless to run, too relentless to stop. His people had faced storms, plagues, predators, and still endured. They had no fleets that could rival hers, no genetic advantage that made them superior. What they had was a kind of defiance that could not be measured. And he believed that very defiance was what made him capable of standing where no one else dared. For the first time since her capture, she began to wonder if perhaps this was not folly but something else, something dangerous in a way the court had not anticipated. He did not treat her as an object or a beast. He treated her as a sovereign who had been stripped of her throne. And in doing so, he forced her to see herself not as the galaxy had painted her, but as she truly was. The warlords outside continued to laugh, but their laughter masked unease. The longer the human lived, the more unsettling the truth became. What if his gamble was not madness? What if his hand raised in defiance had been more than arrogance? What if he truly saw strength where others saw only a curse? The court had expected blood, but instead they were witnessing the slow ignition of something far more dangerous than rage: trust. Whispers spread like wildfire through the courts of power. The human still lived, and worse, the Berserker princess had not torn him apart. No one admitted their unease aloud, but in private chambers and smoky halls, warlords spoke of it in tones meant to disguise their fear. To them it was unnatural, as though a storm had chosen not to strike. Assassins were hired in secret, each convinced that once the human was gone, her wrath would return and balance would be restored. The first attempt came quietly. A poisoned chalice slipped into his quarters under the guise of hospitality. He recognized it for what it was before the first sip, calmly discarding it without complaint. When a blade came for him in the dark, he met it not with strength but with timing and wit, turning an assassin's momentum against him, leaving the corpse in silence. When sabotage threatened the air seals of his chambers, he caught it before it could trigger, methodical and unshaken. Where others relied on muscle or armies, he survived by watching closely, adapting, and refusing to falter. The princess observed each attempt with growing intrigue. She had expected him to crumble, to reveal the fragility of his species. Instead, she saw something alien even to her, a refusal to yield that was neither arrogance nor recklessness. He did not survive through power but through persistence, through the unshakable certainty that each trial was only another storm to be weathered. The galaxy had feared her because of her fury, but now she began to fear him because of his calm. In the moments between danger, their exchanges deepened. She spoke to him in fragments, words pried loose from years of silence. She told him of the fury that consumed her, the implants forced upon her people to turn warriors into living weapons, the betrayal of those who once called her kin. Each word was weighted with bitterness, with pain that had never been allowed voice. He listened without judgment, without interruption, as though her rage was not a curse but a language he was learning. "You think you understand my fire," she said one night, her voice sharp as the edge of a blade. "But even I cannot master it." He met her gaze, without flinching. "Then perhaps you don't need to master it. Perhaps you only need someone who will not run from it." The words settled between them, heavier than chains. For the first time, she felt the possibility that her fury was not something to be bound but something that could be carried, not by suppression, not by fear, but by trust. He did not promise her freedom, nor control, nor absolution. He offered only presence, a vow to endure the storm alongside her. The next attempt on his life was bolder. Armed mercenaries broke through the chamber doors, weapons raised, confident that neither chains nor human flesh could withstand their assault. What they found instead was unity. The human moved first, striking not with brute force but with strategy, turning their formation against itself. The princess followed, even in shackles, her fury igniting in defense not of herself, but of the man who refused to abandon her. The room became a blur of violence, steel against steel, fire against blood, until the last mercenary lay broken on the floor. When silence fell, she looked at him differently. Until that moment, she had believed herself alone in every battle. But now she had seen a truth no one else dared reveal. He had not used her as a shield, nor tried to unleash her rage as a weapon. He had fought beside her, risking his life as if her survival was his own. That choice, reckless and pure, cut deeper than any chain. In the days that followed, she began to share more of herself. Not only the fury and the pain, but fragments of memory, songs of her people, the traditions of a culture now scattered to dust. He listened to each one, committing them to memory as if they were treasures instead of echoes. Where others had tried to erase her past, he honored it, restoring to her something even she thought long lost. The court watched from afar, their unease curdling into fear. The bond between them was no longer rumor but reality. The laughter that once mocked the human now rang hollow, for every day that passed without her killing him was proof of something they could not understand. They feared power, but this was more dangerous than power. This was choice. When she finally spoke the words, her voice was steady, stripped of mockery or threat. "If you stand, I will fight beside you. The declaration was not made in chains, not forced, not coerced. It was a vow freely given. He had come into her storm with nothing but conviction, and now he had earned what no empire could buy, her trust. The galaxy had always seen her as a weapon waiting to be unleashed, but with him, she began to see herself not as a beast but as a sovereign, a partner, a leader once more. Where others saw madness, he had seen possibility. Where others had fled, he had stood. And in that defiance, she found something stronger than rage. The whispers across the stars turned darker. The clans that had once mocked the human now trembled at the thought of what would happen if she truly chose a side. Alone, she was fury incarnate. With him, she might become something no warlord could face, a storm guided by will and sharpened by purpose. The summons from the Galactic Council arrived with the weight of inevitability. Too many whispers had grown into uneasy silence. Too much fear had seeped into the halls of power. The human's audacity was no longer dismissed as foolishness. It was beginning to look like strategy. The warlords could not allow it to stand. They demanded his presence, confident they could strip him of his claim and restore the balance they understood. To them, he was a pest clinging to a weapon far beyond his grasp. To him, it was the moment his gambit demanded. He walked into the chamber with no guards, no armor, no weaponry beyond his voice and his resolve. Beside him, unshackled, strode the Berserker princess. Gasps rippled through the hall. She was not dragged, not bound, but walking of her own will. The council saw not a prisoner, but an equal standing at the side of a human. That image alone was a blow sharper than any blade. The lords mocked him with venom dressed as formality. They sneered at his species, called him arrogant, claimed he had no right to step into their court as anything more than a supplicant. A human dares pretend to rule? One spat, laughter echoing. Yet their voices carried unease, for he had walked unscathed through dangers designed to crush him, and the princess had chosen not to end him. He did not shout to silence them. He did not posture as they did. Instead, he spoke with a calm that forced them to listen. He told them of humanity, a people who had survived not because they were the strongest, but because they had endured every storm hurled against them. He spoke of stubbornness, of bonds forged in hardship, of a will to walk forward when others turned away. You feared her rage, he said, his voice steady, because you never sought to understand it. You feared her strength because you thought it could only be chained. You thought her choice did not matter. But I tell you this, she is no beast. She is a sovereign. And I stand here not as her master, but as her ally. The hall bristled. Their laughter faltered, replaced by disbelief that he dared challenge the foundation of their power. Then the princess herself stepped forward. Her voice cut through the chamber with the force of thunder. You all feared my fury because you could not control it. You called me a monster to hide your own cowardice. Yet this human does not fear me. He does not bind me. He sees me as I am. And I choose him. The declaration cracked the council's unity. Murmurs rose, fear and outrage colliding. Some called for his death. Others demanded she be returned to chains. One warlord, unable to contain his rage, lunged forward, his soldiers rising in kind. The chamber erupted in chaos. But what followed was not the spectacle the council expected. The human moved first, precise and unshaken, turning their numbers against themselves with cunning traps and quick strikes. The princess fought beside him, her fury no longer wild but focused, honed into something more devastating than before. Together they carved through the assault, not as master and weapon, but as equals wielding different strengths. The council watched in stunned silence as their certainty crumbled under the weight of unity. When the chamber lay quiet, broken bodies scattered across its floor, the survivors stared not at the human but at the bond standing beside him. In that silence, a new reality took root. The Berserker princess was no longer a captive, and the human was no longer a fool. Together they were something more dangerous than fear. They were a choice freely made, an alliance forged not by force, but by trust. He turned to the council, his words deliberate and sharp. "You thought bidding on her was suicide. Perhaps it would have been, had I come seeking ownership. But humanity has never been interested in owning storms. We walk into them, and we endure. That is why I raised my hand when no one else dared." Her gaze swept across the chamber, daring any to challenge her vow. None did. The power of her fury had always been feared, but now it was feared for a new reason. No warlord could match the strength of a storm that had chosen its course. The two of them left the council chamber together, the path before them uncertain but undeniable. Whispers spread through the galaxy like cracks through glass. The Berserker princess was no longer a chained beast. She had a hand on her shoulder, a hand that belonged to a human, and it changed everything. The great clans had seen power turned into partnership, fear turned into defiance, and a lone voice raised where silence once reigned. Empires would plot, rivals would scheme, but the seed had been planted. One act of audacity had reshaped the order of the stars. A human had raised his hand when no one else dared, and the galaxy would never forget it.